I want to stop here for a second and see if anyone has any questions. John, go ahead.
You made some comments about, like the office of an apostle. There's 4 other offices, and other than, like installing a pastor into a church, how has the body historically recognized those offices, or how do you know when somebody's operating in one? Is it ever truly spoken, or is it just recognized and, kind of whispered to one another that that's what they're in? I've never heard it discussed.
On how we would formally recognize an office as present? This is obvious, but since I have not lived through the reestablishment of those 5 offices, at least in their fullness, I can only speculate, and maybe based on some biblical statements. I would think if God wanted to make it very clear someone had a certain office, he could just say it. It'd be real clear. But I think the most natural way it would occur is that person would start operating in that office before anyone even formally named the office. We've had ministers among us who have made a very strong argument. I don't mean it's a good argument, but they were very vehement in their arguments about how we've got to declare what office we have. I don't believe that. I think your office declares itself. A man's gift makes room for him. If you've got the goods, people will see it. That's why I said I'm looking for some of these signs of an apostle. And you can read some of the list that Paul came up with. He said these are the signs of an apostle. Miracles are one of those things. Wonders. You have them in front of you?
Yes.
Great. Mighty deeds. I want you to finish it, but we have to be extremely careful because sometimes we may have seen all these things and we just didn't give them the credibility we should have given them. We've seen wonders. We've seen miracles. We've seen some mighty deeds. But we need to be able to see all the package.
This is where Paul was saying, I won't read the whole thing, he said, "For I ought to have been commended to you, for in nothing I am behind the very chiefest of apostles, though I be nothing. Truly the signs of an apostle were wrought among you in patience, in signs, in wonders, and in mighty deeds. For what is it wherein you were inferior to other churches, except it be that I myself was burdensome to you?" He's trying to soft shoe it a little bit and not brag on himself, but I am an apostle.
You just hit a very important point bringing that up that actually helps answer some of John's question, which we'll keep working on. Notice that Paul seems, if you're getting the tenor of his statements, he seems a little frustrated that he has to say that he's an apostle. He's not excited that I get to brag about being an apostle. It's more like, I have to tell you. And when you see Paul make those kind of statements, it almost looks like, if you read between the lines, the church should have already known this. There should have been nobody saying, "Who do you think you are?" Well, I'm an apostle. Most of his statements like that seem to be a defense. Most scholars believe they are. Seem to be a defense that there's somebody challenging his authority. So, yeah. So to come to your point, Brother John, I think, for example, the office of an apostle will be revealed in the work of an individual and the weight of an individual before they ever announce that they're an apostle. I think you'll be able to know you're in the presence of an apostle. And the only time they might have to announce it is if we get in this kind of a bad situation where someone's like, "I don't know who you think you are." Well, I'm an apostle. You want to know how I know that? Well, signs, wonders. Interesting that patience is tucked in there.
Yes.
You ever thought about that? There's layers to what that could mean, which is true of a lot of these kind of statements, but I'll just give you one practical thing. I'm going to tell you what, anybody that is an apostle is going to have gone through some brutal experiences that will teach you patience. Tribulation worketh patience. And patient experience hope, and hope maketh not ashamed. But tribulation worketh patience, meaning if he's been with them in much patience, you know what I think a lot of that is about? You've watched me go through brutal things. And you've seen that I've kept my spirit right. You've seen that I've kept my patience. Patience may seem like a strange thing, but the words that are translated patience, the Greek words that are translated, there's several, that are translated patience, a lot of times refer to staying under the weight of something. You're enduring it. Like somebody put a weight on your back and I'm taking it. Or it sometimes refers to pushing through something, like I'm going to keep moving forward no matter how hard this is. So one of the signs of an apostle is how he takes the tribulation, because tribulation works patience. So here's some things I'd look for if we're looking for apostles. I don't mean tomorrow, but I mean we're going to see apostles. One of the things I'd be looking for are those miracles and signs and wonders. But don't be looking for something so extravagant that you miss the things that have happened. And don't be like Israel and say, "Well, yeah, I know there was a healing, but there's got to be something bigger than that." And then that happens, got to be something else. where it's always got to be something else because you just can't accept that it's actually present. But patience is a pretty interesting characteristic to be involved there. I'm glad you read that, Brother Ferris, because that demonstrates exactly what I keep talking about, the spirit. There's a spirit of an apostle. Some of the men that have claimed to be apostles out in Christendom, and even in this body, did not have the spirit of an apostle. They might argue, and I had one actually say this to me. He told me he was an apostle, someone in this body. He wasn't just telling me, he was telling a group of us, but his argument was, all the tribulation you other ministers are putting me through are the proof. And I thought, okay, a lot of people go through tribulation, doesn't make them an apostle. But it's not just the tribulation, it's not just the tests, it's not just the suffering. It's what kind of spirit is produced by that suffering. What kind of man do you see in the suffering? So the greatest evidences of an apostle, they will have been a man of sorrow and acquainted with grief, just like Jesus was. There'll be somebody that's gone through great suffering in some part of their life, emotionally, physically, maybe other ways.
You might want to look at their back.
Yeah, you might want to look at their back, see how many stripes are there, or knives stuck in it, or who knows. But they'll have gone through suffering and great tribulation. But you'll see somebody who went through it and kept their spirit right.
Yes.
You'll see somebody who came out of tribulation stronger and with a greater measure of the disposition of Christ, with a greater weight in their ministry. That is, to me, one of the greatest signs of an apostle you could find. There is going to be a weight in their words and in their presence that is going to be different than any other minister. I don't mean no other minister will have it, but I mean, if they're not an apostle, you should be able to tell the difference.
Sure.
You should be able to say, this person's words are weightier than most other ministers' words. Their presence is weightier. And I've watched the miracles that have been associated with their ministry. I've seen the patience they've exhibited in the midst of great travail, how they've endured it, and they've kept their spirit right, and maybe been processed in a way that, those are the signs of an apostle, brethren. We could look at others, but those are significant signs of an apostle. So I'm looking for those kind of things. I've seen some of them in people's lives. I've experienced some of them, but we're looking for some of those things as signs. And we don't want to get caught up in the glitter of it. I'm trying to think of a better word.
Sensationalism.
The sensationalism. That's a good word. I wouldn't believe there's an apostle present until I see somebody walk out there and heal a blinded person, blinded eyes. Well, that might help you, but that wouldn't necessarily make him an apostle. There's people that heal blinded eyes that wouldn't have to be an apostle to do that. The Lord gave them that ability. We have to learn to recognize the more subtle signs of an apostle. And then once you start to see those signs, be careful not to get carried away if you think you're watching an apostle either develop or you think you're in the presence of an apostle. Because some of you, if not all of you, are going to see apostles. If you haven't seen apostles, you're going to see apostles. And when that happens, we don't want to get so carried away that it creates problems, where somebody's, well, so-and-so thinks whoever, their pastor, somebody else's pastor, whatever. So-and-so thinks some minister is an apostle, and then, of course, the war will begin to defame that person for being an apostle, because that's where we're at right now, I'm sorry to say. We're in a stage right now where, rather than to be encouraged by the signs, people are being critical of signs.
Proclaim the office, let God promote the office for you.
I don't think you ever need to claim an office unless there is no choice left in terms of dealing with a condition of some kind. Like if somebody were to say to me, and nobody in this room that's ever sat on the platform has done this, but if somebody were to say to me, who do you think you are to correct me? I might have to answer that. I might not want to. I might not want to say who I am and what my role is, but that's what Paul was doing in some of these statements.
Yeah.
At one point he even said, you are going to make me have to get into a fit of bragging, is basically what he said. And that's horrible. I don't want to sit here and go listing my resume and saying, this is why you need to recognize my authority. That should never happen. But you will have people that are not going to accept authority. They're not going to accept the weight that's there, no matter how weighty it is, because it doesn't give them what they want, or they're not in agreement with it. So you'll have those kind of problems. So John, I think in answer to your question, I don't think we're going to need to declare, or someone will have to get up in a meeting and say, bless the Lord, from this day on, brother so-and-so is an apostle. First of all, I'd be a little bit on edge if they did. Maybe they're right, but it would give the impression that a man declaring that is what made it formally true. That's another thing Paul said. He said, I am an apostle, not of man.
Right.
Now, there's a reason he said that. It wasn't just the general statement about the ministry, because some ministers are of man, in a bad way or even in a good way. They could be in a bad way that a man that didn't have any right, didn't have any authority put in the ministry, promoted him. But they could be in a good way, in the sense that maybe a godly man is who trained you up and promoted you and allowed you to be in that position. They laid hands on me, and Paul said that about Timothy, didn't he? He said, we laid hands on you. Don't forsake that gift that was in you by the laying on of hands of the presbytery, the elders, and laying on of my hands, he said in one place. There is a level at which man is involved in the process of promotion, but not with an apostle. An apostle is not made an apostle by man. He could be in the ministry because a man mentored him and he went into the ministry. But to become an apostle takes God doing it. See, we're in a different situation, Brother John and brethren, than they were in the days of Jesus. See, apostles in Jesus' day were created by him in person. That's gone so far, some people have said that nobody could be an apostle anytime after that unless Jesus himself appeared in person to do it. I don't know if I'd go that far with it, but you realize all the 12, that is Luke 6, isn't it?
Yeah. And when it was day, he called unto him disciples. Of them he chose 12, whom he named apostles.
All right, so he had a lot of disciples, but only 12 that were given that title of apostles, and they really weren't empowered to be apostles yet until the day of Pentecost, but he was giving them a title they were going to be empowered to carry out. So in Jesus' case, John, Jesus named them. He said, you're going to be the apostles, but they didn't even have the power to do that job at the level they were going to have on the day of Pentecost. But Jesus' template for doing that is not quite exactly what I think it'll be in our day, because Jesus was present with them, training them for 3.5 years to be apostles. In our day, we've had men that are already in the ministry that aren't starting from scratch. We could have people called to be apostles from scratch, but I think because of the nature of how the ministry has been established, it started with apostles in Jesus' day and then seemed to grow out from there. Now we're working back to apostles. So I think what we'll see potentially could be men who are ministers who are raised up to the level of apostles. And when that happens, that stage won't be something that can be done by men. That person maybe went in the ministry. This would be wonderful. I'd be thrilled if this was the case. If some of you were apostles. That'd be a blessing to me if some of you were apostles. And if I was the one who sent you out in the ministry, I can't make you an apostle though. I could send you out in the ministry. You could be out there as an evangelist or a pastor or who knows what. And then God could take you up to the level of an apostle, but I can't make you an apostle. I can help make you a minister, potentially, if God's called you to be one. We'll need God's help, of course, involved. But I can be a part of you becoming a minister if you're called to be one, but I cannot make you an apostle. Only the Lord can do that. That's what I mean, how it's a higher level, more direct appointment.
Is the office of an apostle always the same, or are there different levels of apostles within that office?
Brother Chappell asked, is the office of an apostle just one level? I think that's what you're saying. Or are there different levels of apostles that have different levels of authority? What's your answer to that?
Yes. If there was an inner circle, there would have to be different levels.
Brother John said if there's an inner circle, there'd have to be different levels. They would have had to be at a higher level.
Peter, James, and John had a different calling over Andrew, Philip, and Nathaniel. Even though they're all apostles and they all went out doing great works, there was definitely different authorities placed on different ones, specifically for different tasks. Look how Andrew dealt with individuals. You see him getting the boy with the loaves and fishes. You see the Grecians coming to him, asking him to go to talk to Jesus, and him bringing them over. He went and got his brother, Peter. He always had a knack or a calling working in that way of the individual. He saw the individual's need and he went and met the need and he ministered in that particular way. You see Peter being a major spokesman, talking to the larger crowds. So Andrew going to the one caused the one to be able, in the right time, speak to thousands, and thousands came into the church to be saved. If it wasn't for Andrew doing his job and work that God wanted him to do, the thousands wouldn't have come in on the day of Pentecost. And so God was putting the pieces right where they needed to be to work the most effectively to bring about his plan of salvation.
And you can really see the effectiveness of that in the different ways the different apostles worked. They had different types of roles that they filled.
I think Paul developed a special authority to correct Peter when he was wrong in disassembling. But he couldn't have done that if he was, you're not doing the right thing. Well, who are you to tell me?
He did it in love. He loved Peter.
But Peter recognized that authority because, again, the voice of the shepherd was there.
And Peter comments about Paul later on.
Yes.
I don't know if you've thought about this, brethren, but Peter got his insight into the inclusion of the Gentiles by that vision.
Right.
It isn't that he studied the Bible and came up with all these reasons the Gentiles should be included. He got a vision that was kind of against his own will. I'm not going to, whereas Paul, if you read between the lines of his statements, when he's talking about the mystery that was revealed to him, and he talks about the inclusion of the Gentiles, it looks like Paul had far greater insight into the Scriptures that were foreshadowing the Gentiles. Peter just had a vision.
Yes.
Paul had all that knowledge. Don't you know, Peter, all these scriptures in Isaiah, for example, talking about what's going to happen with the Gentiles? I realize this could be shocking to some, but it shouldn't be. This is the levels of apostles that y'all brought up.
Yeah, right.
Paul was a far greater teacher than Peter.
Yes.
I don't think Peter would be insulted by that. Peter might have been better in some other category, but there is no doubt Paul was the epitome of a new covenant teacher.
Yes.
With the authority of an apostle.
Right.
Which means you're at a level in terms of teaching and authority that
And he even calls himself a teacher.
Peter had a vision, and Peter knew, well, the Lord wants the door to be open to the Gentiles. Paul had not only a vision, Paul had all that massive amount of knowledge of all these scriptures. And when God opened his eyes, all these statements about the Gentiles, that's the mystery. Just look for the word mystery. Paul's the one that mainly uses it, and he's talking about that hidden truth about the Gentiles being included in the plan of salvation most of the time when he's talking about it. That was why Paul could do what he did, brethren, because he not only had a vision, so to speak, of what God wanted to do with the Gentiles, he had the knowledge to back it up. Here's why I keep saying back to the Bible. He could go to the Bible and say, Peter, you better treat them better because look at all these verses where God intended to use the Gentiles and in some degrees even replacing our people, at least for a time, until the Jews can be restored back in.
It's much the same when Philip went into Samaria. And he did signs, he did wonders, he baptized, he preached the blood of Christ. But here comes Peter and John to establish deeper. Here it comes to apostles. Established deeper through deeper teachings, or doctrinal things like that. It's the same thing with Peter and Paul. Philip was just opening the door, and his office worked to a certain point that he had to send for the apostles. Peter was opening a door that God wanted him to open, the door to the Gentiles. Open the door. But you're not the one that's going to teach the Gentiles. I have another one that's going to come in who's going to root them and ground them in the truth through teaching, core teachings. They were Gentiles. They didn't know anything about the law of Moses or about all the history. Those are some things that Paul had to work through in rooting that whole Gentile group. And so Peter, in some sense, was like Philip, opening the door and getting things ready, but had to allow God to bring in another man who had the calling to root them, to ground them, to teach them deep truths that it took time. Some areas he taught for years, and he even reminded them, remember when we went over this, remember when we talked about this, I taught you daily as we came, and it wasn't just a weekly Bible study, it was a daily going through all that learning and knowledge.
Well, brethren, we usually go about 3 hours, and we try not to go too far over 3 hours, unless the Lord's really moving. So we've got a little bit more time. There is one passage I've had in my mind for some time that is very familiar to all of you that I think it'd be good for us to go through, because we've been talking about the signs of an apostle, which is way above a lot of pay grades, all right? So bringing it back down to the initial entry level, if you want to call it that, to the ministry. I think one of the best passages you can read about the type of qualities we need to have. We need to have them at every level. But this is an entry-level passage, is the 6th chapter of Acts, and the description of the conditions associated with what is sometimes called the 7 deacons there. We talked about this probably in another session we've had. I know we talked about it when we went through some of the classes on the ministry several years ago, but the word translated deacon is not referring to some specialized office in the church that's like a trustee or something of that sort. The word diakonos, is translated deacon, just means minister. When you look at the context where that word is used, that Greek word, it seems to be referring to ministers in general, but in this kind of context, seems to be referring to what we might call an assistant minister. The kind of role you brethren are filling on different levels. Some might be closer to being a true assistant pastor, but I mean something different by the title minister or assistant minister than assistant pastor. An assistant pastor, the way we might think of it, is somebody who's the right-hand person of the overseer of the church. You can be a minister or an assistant minister without being in that exact position and still serve in a ministerial capacity. This is the first stage I was talking about in terms of these levels, and maybe this will be one of the last things we'll talk about unless you have some more things on your mind. It's really beautifully expressed in the 6th chapter of Acts because it shows you the stages of the ministry, and it shows you why there's certain stages you get to where you just cannot do the work of the other stages. Somebody else has to be able to assist in those areas. It's in Exodus where Moses' father-in-law comes, Jethro. This would be something we go into in another minister session because it takes me too long to get into it here. But Jethro recognized that Moses wasn't able to do this job all by himself. If you're reading between the lines of what he's saying here, he's basically using the exact same guideline we're going to find here in Acts 6 for why the apostles couldn't do everything. You're the one who's supposed to be praying for the people. You're the one who's supposed to be giving us the law. If you're taking care of all these administrative things, you're not going to have time to do those bigger things. And that's how the levels of the ministry work. We start out in the ministry doing things that can sometimes seem almost menial, administrative things, just helping out. You're not in the spotlight as much. But that's good, because if the reason you wanted to be in the ministry was be in the spotlight, you're there for the wrong motive anyway. So if you start off in the dark and get used to the dark, you'll be comfortable with not being in the spotlight. But I'm not going to go through that passage, but it is an interesting passage to look at in this context because it shows you the need that Moses had because the scale of the work was too large and you need to have other men. And these are pretty important roles. These weren't just other men to help clean up the camp or organize a workforce. These were judges. So basically what occurred was Reuel, or Jethro, his father-in-law, advised him, and it appears to be wise advice, you need to let the less complex, less critical problems be dealt with by certain quality of men. Do you have it in front of you? I didn't want to go through that whole passage, but it does describe the quality of men he's looking for. Who has it in front of him?
Have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one another.
This is what Moses is telling his father-in-law he's been doing. He was going morning to night, just judging cases.
And I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws. And Moses' father-in-law said unto him, the thing that thou doest is not good. Thou surely will wear away both thou and this people.
Now, pause there a second. I don't know if you caught that. You'll wear away yourself. Well, that's common sense. Nobody can do that. You burn out. But he didn't just say you'll wear away yourself. He said you'll wear away yourself and this people. Let me tell you how that would happen, because he's going to start getting frayed edges, and he's going to start not having the kind of patience he needs to have, and he is going to start wearing some people out in the way we use in our language. He's going to start mistreating people and being impatient with people because he's going to be so worn out. Go ahead.
For this thing is too heavy for thee.
Too heavy.
Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. Hearken now unto my voice, and I will give thee counsel, and God shall be with thee. Be thou for this people to Godward, that thou mayest bring the causes unto God. And thou shalt teach them the ordinances and laws, and shalt show them the way wherein they must walk.
See, that was his role. Moses was the one who was supposed to be teaching the ordinances and laws, showing them the way they should walk, how to live their lives,
and the work that they must do,
and their different responsibilities. He could not have done that effectively if he had to judge cases all day long.
He says great matters.
Now, where does it describe the type of judges he told him to choose?
25th.
Yeah, go ahead.
And Moses chose able men.
Okay, able. That means capable. Men that could actually do the job. He didn't find men and train them. He found men that were good at judging cases.
Yes, they were already able.
There's some levels of the ministry you can't just train somebody for first. They can't learn that on the job. You can cause too much damage. You got to find somebody who has the right qualities for that job. Now, brethren, the reason I'm bringing this up is that's why I want you to find your strengths. I want you to know your strengths, because we're going to need every strength in this room to keep building this church.
Yes.
I'm not going to be doing it by myself, even if I had the ego and ambition to think I should. I don't think I should. This needs to be a team effort, and so we need to find what our strengths are. How can we help build this the way God wants it built? What are your strengths you can add to this work? I don't mean naturally, I'm talking about spiritually. What is your strength that you can add to this that we're doing? Perfect example of that's when you see them fighting with the Amalekites and Moses needs his hands lifted up. Have you ever thought about why it was Aaron and Hur holding his hands up? Why wouldn't it Joshua and Caleb? They were his right-hand men, right?
They were fighting.
That's right. They were leading the battle. Joshua and Caleb had a job to do that was critical. When I was young, I thought, why wasn't Joshua one of the ones holding up his arms? Joshua was doing a job just as important. Joshua and Caleb were the warriors. They were out there fighting the Amalekites, and Aaron and Hur, and by the way, if you look at the chronologies, they were not young men. Those were two old men who got up there under Moses' arms. Two old men, not two young, strong guys. Two men his age. Moses wasn't young at that time, and Aaron was just a few years younger. They got up under and held his arms up. Two senior brothers in the church. Two elder men in the church got in there and held his arms up. And then the young men, oh, they're out there fighting the battle. So you see how we need to all fill our roles? All right, so now come back to Acts 6. It says, in those days when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews, because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. Clearly they were gathering up money like we gather an offering, and they were helping take care of the ones who were widows and orphans and other things, which had been a tradition in Israel. And the Grecians here were not Gentile believers. The Grecians here were Hellenized Jews. I don't want to wade into this, but I got in a debate with someone one time who said that there were already Gentiles in the church before Peter even went to Cornelius' household, or before Paul. And I said, no. And they said, well, the Grecians. This is Hellenized Jews. That means they were Jews that had taken on Grecian culture. There were a lot of the Jews that had become Hellenized. Hellenized means to take on Greek culture. So these were Grecian Jews, and the Hebrews who were not Hellenized, I'm sure they thought they think less of us, you know. Some of our culture is different. Some of our traditions are different. See what I mean? There were people with different traditions in the church. Some of our customs are a little different. And so we're getting treated like second-class citizens. They're taking care of their widows, but because of our culture, they're not treating us as well. And so, of course, that caused a controversy in the church. And it says, then the 12 called the multitude of the disciples unto them and said, it's interesting they said this. They must have had somebody say, why aren't you all taking care of these administrative issues? What's the matter with you? Why aren't you taking care of the widows? They said, it's not reason that we should leave the word of God and serve tables. By the way, that wasn't an arrogant statement, like we're above this. It was just like Moses. If we start serving the tables and taking care of these administrative tasks, what God's called us to do, we won't be able to do. We won't be able to have time to teach the word. I'm going to say it, all right, but I don't say this for sympathy, just for prayer. There's some weeks that I don't know where the time goes. It's gone. I tell precious brother Tom Dominy with the men's prayer breakfast every month, I say, if I can be there, I'm going to be there. I've been there sometimes, but sometimes my day can start at 4 or 5 in the morning and it just goes and it's gone. Day after day with the cares of the other churches. I may be writing, I may be studying. There's family and you're a husband and a father. My time is very full. I'm not saying that as a complaint. It's a blessing, all right, that the Lord would honor me with the responsibility, all right? But that's why we need this to be teamwork, because it isn't possible as each of us reach a certain level of the ministry, and not just me, as each of us do. Brother Chappell's in this kind of responsibility as a pastor of a church. As each of us reach a certain level of the ministry, our capability to cover things will become less. We won't be able to do all the things that need done, and somebody else, theirs holding up to the arms like Aaron and Hur did. There's having judges. That's something we don't think of in terms of the work of the church, but I'm going to tell you right now, brethren, we're going to have to get to a point where some conditions get dealt with in-house. You do not know, Brother Jerome, how much you impressed me and blessed me with something you did here a little bit ago. I'm going to tell you, brothers, because this situation won't be obvious the way I'm going to explain it, okay? But there was a situation that might have taken a lot of my attention with some of the precious new folks that because of my role I was being pulled on to deal with, that Brother Jerome understood pretty well what the situation was, and he said, here's what I'm going to do, Brother Bear. Of course, he did it respectfully. He said, if it's okay with you, I can handle this. I'll talk to these people. I'll get this taken care of. And you know, it all got taken care of. I didn't have to deal with that. I don't mind dealing with it. It wouldn't have bothered me at all. But see, that's how we all get done what we need to get done, is we share that load. And he took a burden from me that I wouldn't have minded bearing. But because you did that, I was able to deal with some things that were a little higher level of critical nature. Right. Because the higher the level we are in the ministry, the more we tend to have to focus on the critical issues. So a lot of the things that are on my plate are more life and death and high-level vision and working with ministers and other things that we have to be able to share this load so nobody's left out, so things are taken care of. And so, though it might seem like a strange thing, we need judges. We need men who are able men. You can say, you know what, I can just give that person that responsibility. I never worry about children's church, Brother Stephen. I don't feel any need to micromanage it. I don't feel any need to get in there and if I felt something strong from the Lord, You know I'll talk to you about it, but that's a perfect example. I think we're going to have the same in some of these other areas where we've had people working. I want it to get to a place where they can come to me if they need me for anything, but they can operate without me if they don't need me, meaning we're self-contained. So people in charge of different departments, if you need me, I'm there for whatever you need. But you don't have to come to me with all the things that are day-to-day things because that's your department and you're managing that. That's how a church is growing like we're growing will be able to sustain.
Level of trust.
Brother Ferris, that's a beautiful point. He said it takes a level of trust. It is the highest compliment I can give you if I say I don't need to micromanage you.
Yeah.
Because there are times I've had to micromanage people. I didn't want to, but I just knew if I'm not really involved in this process, I don't know which way it'll go. I don't know what might happen. Maybe the personality that was involved in a leadership role was somebody that could push buttons or get testy or, So you got to keep real close track of them so they don't hurt somebody's feelings or do something. But see, that's where training comes in. Where eventually we need to get to a point where we don't need to worry about that. We don't need to worry about somebody doing something offensive or jumping on somebody. We'd never have someone like that on the platform. We'd never have someone like that in a department head position where we'd have to worry about them doing something harmful.